to chapter 2. Let's talk immunology. And let's make this nice and big. Oh, there it is under view. Dun, 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 dun. There we go. Okay, so in chapter 2, the focus is going to be on some of the characteristics of innate immunity that are going to be involved in keeping us safe. And so among these are going to be, just anatomical barriers and little proteins that actually are very good at punching holes in bacteria. Some of these are called defensins, and we'll get to some of the other names, Reg 3 gamma, catalycidins. We will get to those in just a minute. And then the other major one is a thing called complement, the complement system, which has many different components, and all the components are floating around in your bloodstream at any one time. And once they are activated, you'll activate it in a couple different ways, and activation will lead to, once again, just a hole being put in some kind of bacterium or fungus or parasite. And these are very useful. They help keep us healthy, definitely. And so this is a big part of the immune system. It's not going to involve the white blood cells yet. We are going to get to those later. That's going to be most of the rest of the course, in fact. But for now, let's talk, innate barriers and innate immunity. Okay, so there are a lot of ways that a pathogen can fail to get in and fail to do any, real harm to an individual. And you can think of these ways as the different layers that are protecting us. So, one, if you got an anatomical barrier, here we're talking like skin, something like that, then boom, the pathogen stays on the outside, away from the cells that it wants to get to, and you are not sick. And so it's failed. But if that doesn't work, then it's going to lead to some kind of infection. So let's say it gets in there, that's fine. There are still some broadly specific effectors. These are going to be things like complement and like your defensins, for example. And even things like mucus can serve a barrier and sort of snare function. They can catch and trap bacteria and viruses and just, make them wait it out. They basically run out of time and eventually fall apart while they are trying, desperately trying to get to your cells. And so, once again, it's another way that we can stay safe. If not, then we're going to bring in actual effector cells. So cells that can actually do a little bit of inflammation, or that can actually bring along some proteins or chemicals that will physically destroy whatever it is that is making you sick. Examples of these would be your granulocytes and things like macrophages, things like your basophils, neutrophils, eosinophils, mast cells, those sorts of cells. And it can definitely lead to, protection. And then lastly, while we're doing these three sort of holding activities that may or may not ever need, the heavies to be called in, we're trying to develop the the adaptive immune system, which is going to include B and T cells. And these cells are going to be there to go in and actually clean up the last traces. So innate immunity actually does most of the work. Innate immunity and just these sort of thoughtless barriers that just absolutely block things from coming in or just randomly destroy anything of a certain type, like any bacteria. They are very effective, and thank goodness, because it takes a while for the adaptive immune system to get going. And we don't want to rely on that as our first line of defense. Okay, so let's talk anatomical barriers and initial defenses. And some of these are quite interesting. So, if we were to look at this little table, it's got a lot of different things that can make you sick. And it's got a lot of sites where some of these pathogenic organisms can commonly enter. So let's look at some of the routes of entry. Let's just take a moment. So mouth and respiratory tract. Now that's a place where, you just have openings into your body. Interestingly, the mouth and your gut are considered the outside of your body because the blood is actually flowing on the inside of those It's like a little tunnel that passes right through you. And same thing with your respiratory system. This is just like a pocket where we happen to breathe in air, do a little gas exchange. But even the inside of your lungs, where the air is, that is considered the outside, that's an external surface of your body. And so, as long as we are able to contain things on the outside of that and they don't get into the lung cells or beyond the lung cells to the bloodstream, then essentially, yeah, we've managed to keep out a pathogen. But there are a lot of viruses and a lot of other kinds of things, bacteria and fungi, that can get in to your respiratory tract. And the problem with a pocket, like our respiratory tract, is that it is designed to maximize, or rather, it is optimized to maximize air exchange. And for air exchange, air has to be moving kind of slowly. Now, you have to have these things called surfactants that work kind of like soap. And these are down in your lungs. They're secreted by the type 2 pneumocytes. And they kind of grease the way so that air can flow right down into those cells at the very bottom of your lungs. Problem is that if that air is carrying viruses or bacteria, then those also get passage all the way down. And then our air exchange is actually broken into these little tiny sacs, the alveoli. And so airflow into and out of individual alveoli is going to be really low compared to airflow through some of the larger airways, like the bronchi, for example. And so, because of that, it kind of gives any pathogens that do make it into that space more time and less turbulence that'll be pushing against them and trying to knock them out. So, yeah, it makes sense that we get a lot of infections that way. And COVID 19 would be another one of these that can come in through the mouth and respiratory tract. Now, the other main route of infection is going to be the gastrointestinal tract. And if you think about it, our respiratory tract and gastrointestinal tract are actually connected because, yeah, you can breathe in through your mouth and you can drink or eat through your mouth. And, we have a way to send those products to different places as they are needed. And occasionally, yeah, you drink something and it goes a little bit down the wrong hole into your lungs. And that feels very uncomfortable. But these are connected. And so there's always the potential that something can go from one location to the other. So generally, the direction of flow is going to be respiratory to intestinal. Because if something doesn't grow until it gets down to the intestines, there's no good way for it to come right back up from the intestines. And the stomach is just this little lake of acid that destroys or has a pretty good go at destroying most things. A few little bacteria or viruses are able to make it through. They may be inside the middle of a blob of, food or mucus, something like that. But it can be done. Now, other things that we may not think about, but are definitely possible routes of infection, are basically anywhere that you can get to living cells in the body. So, the neat thing or terrible thing, maybe, about bodies and humans is that we are essentially dead on the outside. Most of those epithelial cells, if you were to take an electron microscope picture of them, they're actually dried out and they do not have many components left in there. They're just sort of compacted, freeze dried versions of a cell. That's what they look like. Obviously, they're not actually freeze dried. And so, yeah, we're dead on the outside, but the question is, how far do you have to go to get to actual living cells? So, in the eyes, yes, you got living cells right in there. On the inside of the mouth, yes, those are epithelia, but they are made of living cells or cells that are fairly close to that, much closer than on the epidermis on your skin, for example. Same thing in the intestines. You have cells in there that have to be alive because they have to be exchanging nutrients, bringing in nutrients. That is their function, or bringing in water, or spitting out, various metabolites. That's why we have intestines, because they're good at absorbing. But yeah, that means that they're also a potential route where we can get infected. And so there are lots of things that will infect via the reproductive tract. That's one way, or going in through the mouth. Basically, anything that'll get a potential pathogen onto some of those living cells, that is a potential route of infection. I guess the other ones would be actual something like a needle stick or a cut or an abrasion. That is another good way to actually get viruses or more commonly bacteria right into the bloodstream where they will then potentially cause some problems or into a muscle, for example. That's where like a flesh eating bacterium would tend to hang out. Okay. And so even so that what we're talking about down here, that's the external epithelia, so wounds and abrasions, yeah, definitely. Or there's some things that'll just burrow into your dead or dying skin cells, and they may consume these, or they may just find that it's a good place to live and hang out where there be lots of food coming by. Another thing to think about, though, are insect bites. So you take something like Zika virus or yellow fever, or any of these things, and yeah, they can be transmitted by, depending on the type of illness we're talking about. Ticks are very common, mosquitoes are very common. Basically, anything that can go into your bloodstream has the potential to transmit viruses. Just think of a mosquito bite as like the dirtiest needle in the world. You have no idea where that needle's been, but it was probably stuck into something before it was stuck into you. And yeah, it will be transmitting a little bit of whatever the mosquito just ate and whatever happens to be growing in the mosquito, because there are no mosquito doctors and no mosquito hospitals. And when they get viruses, they've still got babies to feed. And so they end up passing on these viruses to other animals like us, just kind of by accident. So that's the way that works. All right. And breaking this down a little further, you can say, okay, we got different kinds of pathogens. What are these things after in the world? So there are some kinds of creatures that would go for the surface of the cells. These are generally going to be things that are trying to eat you, that are trying to consume, yeah, cells. And so they're going to tend to stay on the outside and just sort of dissolve the cells and slurp up the nutrients there. But there are others, very insidious things that will actually live inside your cells. So this is the way viruses work. They have to be inside your cells. Some will be in the cytoplasm. Some will take themselves into the nucleus, but then also kind of transport things back and forth through the cytoplasm. And things like tuberculosis, caused by a bacterium, which actually invades some cells in your lung and will live inside of those. And bacteria like this actually have to live that way. They are defective. They're missing some of the components that you would find in bacteria that can live on their own. And they compensate for this by just hanging out inside your cells where food is delivered to their door every day. Yeah, it's it's like Waiter or DoorDash, but so much more convenient. It's nice and warm and safe and homey. Yeah, that's what they think of your lungs. All right. And I'd say that's a good place. Let's pause this video right here, and then we'll come back and pick it up in the second section right from here, where we're looking at some of the different ways that we can slow down these pathogens that are out to get us.